Hypnos, and like every quiet night, I have a story to share. You may subscribe for the night ahead. Close your eyes and let the story begin. In the summer of 1942, in Louisville, Kentucky, a boy was born into a world divided by lines he could not yet see. His parents named him Cassius Clay. The name carried weight, echoing the history of an abolitionist from Kentucky. But to the child it was simply sound, something spoken by his mother as she rocked him, something called by his father as he grew. Louisville was a city of contrast. Downtown, shop windows gleamed and horse-drawn wagons clattered past the grand buildings of Main Street. But in the neighborhoods where black families lived, the streets were narrower, the houses smaller, the rules of segregation clear. Signs marked water fountains, theaters, restaurants. A boy like Cassius grew up knowing which doors were open to him and which were not. His father, Cassius Clay, painted signs for a living. Steady work, but never enough to lift the family above worry. His mother, Odessa, worked as a domestic, strong in faith and determined in spirit. They gave their son love, but also a knowledge of hardship. Cassius was lively, restless, full of energy. He ran through streets with friends, shadow boxed against invisible opponents, shouted challenges into warm Kentucky evenings. He liked to make people laugh, liked to make himself noticed, but beneath the playfulness was pride. Even as a child, he carried a sense of himself that was larger than the world around him allowed. At 12, something happened that would change his life. His bicycle, red and white, a prized possession, was stolen. Furious, he wanted to fight the thief, though he had no idea who it was. A police officer named Joe Martin overheard his anger. "You better learn how to fight before you start challenging people," Martin told him, pointing him toward a small boxing gym in the basement of a building nearby. The gym smelled of sweat and leather, of sawdust sprinkled on the floor to soak the moisture. Heavy bags swung slowly in the air. Speed bags rattled under quick fist, and boys trained under the watchful eye of Martin, who also coached young fighters. Cassius stepped inside, wide-eyed, curious, drawn by the rhythm of gloves snapping against canvas. He began training. At first, he was raw, wild with his punches, awkward with his feet. But he had speed, uncommon speed for a boy his size. And he had determination. He listened, he practiced, he stayed after others had gone home. Day by day, he learned to jab, to dance, to move. Soon, the gym became his second home. Outside, he was still a boy from Louisville, subject to the boundaries of segregation. Inside the ring, he was something else, free, in control, untouchable. By his mid-teens, Cassius was winning amateur bouts. His style was already unique. Hands low, feet light, mouth never still. He taunted opponent, predicted rounds, made the crowd laugh. Confidence poured out of him, not arrogance, but belief. Told anyone who would listen that he was destined to be great. And unlike most boys who boozed, he gave reason to believe him. At night, laying in bed, he sometimes whispered it to himself, "I'm the greatest." He said it before the world ever echoed it back. Louisville Street remained narrow. The signs of segregation still hang. But in a small boy who had lost a bicycle and found a gym, something new had begun. Cassius Clay had discovered boxing, and with it, the first step toward becoming Mohamed Ali. By the late 1950s, Cassius Clay had become a name people in amateur boxing circles knew well. His feet were quick, his jab was sharp, and his tongue was even quicker. He won local tournament, then regional, then national. Each fight was another step upward, each victory another piece of evidence for what he already believed, that greatness was his destiny. In 1960, when he was only 18, Cassius earned a place on the United States Olympic boxing team. The games would be held in Rome. For a boy from Louisville who had rarely traveled beyond his own state, the idea of Italy seemed like a dream. Marble Street, ancient ruins, the eyes of the world watching. When he arrived, he felt the excitement of athletes gathered from across the globe. The Olympic village was alive with languages he had never heard, flags he had only seen in books. Cassius walked among them with wide eyes, but his confidence never faltered. He trained with determination, rising early, shadow boxing with the same energy he had carried in Louisville gyms. In the ring, his style dazzled. He moved as though the canvas were a dance floor, gliding light on his toes, his punches flashing and retreating. In boot after boot, he outclassed opponent. By the time he reached the final, the crowd already knew his name. Against Pizzerkowski of Poland, a strong and seasoned fighter, Cassius boxed with precision and speed. He won decisively, and when the referee raised his arm, he smiled while dropped in the American flag. An Olympic champion at just 18. The gold medal was proof to the world, but also to himself. He had said he was destined for greatness, and here was the first crown to show it. He walked proudly through Rome with the medal around his neck, letting it gleam in the Italian sun. But when he returned to Louisville, reality cut through the shine. He was still a black man in a segregated South. Restaurants that celebrated his victory in newspapers refused to serve him at their counters. The gold medal could not erase the lines drawn by prejudice. Cassius never forgot that sting. He later told stories of being denied service, of throwing the medal into the Ohio River in anger and sorrow. Whether that detail was legend or truth, it revealed the deeper truth of his heart, that he could win Olympic gold for his country, but still be treated as less within it. The medal gave him fame, but also clarity. Boxing was not only a sport. For him, it would become a platform, a voice, a way to declare his worth to a world that tried to deny it. Rome had given him gold. Louisville had given him reality. Together, they shaped the young man who would step from the amateur ring into the professional, carrying not just gloves and speed, but conviction. The boy from Louisville was now an Olympic champion, but the man he would become, Mohamed Ali, was only beginning to emerge. After Rome, Cassius Clay returned to America with a gold medal and a burning certainty that he was destined for more. Amateur boxing had given him recognition. Professional boxing would give him a stage, and on that stage, he intended not only to fight, but to perform. He turned professional later in 1960. In his early fight, he dazzled crowds. He moved differently than other heavyweights, faster, lighter, as if gravity itself touched him less. His feet danced, his fist flashed, and all the while his mouth never stopped. He taunted opponent, predicted the rounds in which they would fall, recited verses that made crowds laugh, and reporters scribble furiously. I'm young, I'm pretty, I'm fast, and I can't be beat, he declared, and people believed him, or at least they wanted to see if he was right. Some loved his bravado, others called it arrogance, but either way they watched. That was exactly what he wanted. Fight after fight, he climbed the ranks. Wins piled up. He fought seasoned boxers, men older, stronger, more experienced, and he defeated them one by one. His time was unorthodox, his hands often held low, his chin daringly exposed, but his reflexes were so sharp that punches slid past him like shadows. He seemed untouchable. Reporters began to follow his every word, not just his punches, gave them headlines with his rhymes, his predictions, his boastful charm. Flowed like a butterfly, sting like a bee, he said, and the phrase followed him everywhere. By 1963, his record was nearly perfect, his reputation enormous, but he was still seen by many as a flamboyant young challenger, not yet a true champion. That would change soon. In 1964, Cassius Clay stood in the ring with Sonny Liston, the reigning heavyweight champion in the world. Liston was feared, powerful, restless, with fists like sledgehammers. Few gave Cassius a chance, yet Cassius, as always, predicted victory. He shouted at Leston during weigh-ins, danced around him in press conferences, filled the air with his voice. When the bell rang, the world watched as the young contender did what no one expected. He danced around Leston faster than the champion could follow. His jab snapped again and again, his feet never still. Round after round, Leston grew frustrated, then weary. By the 7th round, he refused to rise from his stool. Cassius Clay had won. At 22 years old, he was the heavyweight champion of the world. He shouted to the crowd, his voice echoing through history, "I am the greatest." The boy from Louisville, once 12-year-old looking for his stolen bicycle, had risen to the top of boxing. But even as the crowd roared, another transformation was waiting, one that would carry him beyond sport and into legend. The night Cassius Clay defeated Sonny Liston in February 1964, the world seemed to tilt. The upset was so shocking that some refused to believe what they had seen. Leston had been a force, a man opponent feared before the first bell. Yet in Miami, under the hot light, a younger challenger danced around him and left him beaten. Cassius shouted from the ring, "I shook up the world. I am the greatest." His arms raised, his voice carrying over stunned reporters and booing skeptics. He announced his arrival not only as a champion, but as a phenomenon. In the days that followed, he revealed another truth. He was no longer Cassius Clay. He announced that he had embraced Islam, guided by the Nation of Islam and Malcolm X. His new name was Mohamed Ali. The announcement shocked America. For some, it was an act of pride, of independence, of a young black man defining himself in a country still bound by segregation. For others, it was defiance, even betrayal. Many in the press refused to use his new name. Some fans turned away, but Ali stood firm. "Cassius Clay was my slave name," he said. "I didn't choose it. I don't want it. I am Mohamed Ali." With that declaration, he became more than a boxer. He became a symbol of identity, of resistance, of courage. And like every symbol, he divided opinion. Crowds booed as often as they cheered. Writers mocked him as much as they praised. Yet, through it all, Ali remained unshaken, his voice loud, his conviction unbreakable. In the ring, he defended his title. In 1965, he fought Leston again. The fight ended in the first round with what would forever be called the phantom punch, a blow so quick and subtle that many swore they had not seen it land. Leston fell, the referee countered, and Ali stood over him, shouting, "Get up and fight." The photograph of that moment became iconic. Ali towering, defiant, alive with fury and pride. Outside the ring, he was equally bold. He spoke openly of race, of injustice, of faith. He aligned himself with causes that made many uncomfortable. But Ali had never sought comfort, not his own, not anyone else. He sought truth as he saw it, and he spoke it without hesitation. By the mid-1960s, Mohamed Ali was heavyweight champion of the world. But more than that, he was becoming a figure larger than sport. He was a voice, a presence, a young man afraid to stand where few dare stand. And soon, the world would ask him to make a choice between his crown and his conscience. In 1967, Mohamed Ali stood at the height of his powers. He was 25 years old, undefeated, the heavyweight champion of the world. His fight was spectacles, his press conferences performances, his name known in every corner. Yet outside the ring, a different battle awaited him, one not fought with gloves, but with conviction. The United States was deep in the Vietnam War. Young men were being drafted, called to fight overseas. When Ali's name appeared for induction, the government expected him to serve. But Ali had already spoken clearly. I ain't got no quarrel with them. No Viet Cong ever called me near. For Ali, the war was not his fight. His faith forbade him to take part in a conflict he did not believe in. His conscience told him to stand firm. When the day came to report, he refused to step forward. He stood still. The response was swift. The government stripped him of his boxing license. His title was taken. He was convicted of draft evasion, sentenced to prison, though appeals kept him free. For nearly 4 years, he was barred from the sport that had made him famous. It was exile, but not silence. Ali traveled the country, speaking at colleges, standing before students who listened to him, not as fighter, but as prophet. He spoke of war, of race, of dignity. He told them that courage was not only in the ring, but in the choices a man made when the world demanded his submission. He was mocked, revealed, praised, admired. To some, he was traitor, to others, hero. But through it all, he did not waver. He spoke his truth, knowing the cost. The years of exile were hard. He trained without fight, kept his body ready, though no ring awaited him. Money ran thin, friends drifted, yet his spirit remained intact. When he walked into lecture halls, students cheered. They saw in him someone who stood for belief over comfort, conscience over crown. In 1971, the Supreme Court overturned his conviction. The decision was narrow, but it restored his right to fight. By then, the world had changed. The war had grown unpopular. The voices that once condemned him began to see him differently. And Ali, older now, returned to the ring not only as a boxer, but as a man who had refused to bend. The boy from Louisville had become champion of the world. Then he became an outcast. But through it all, he had remained Mohamed Ali, standing firm, unbroken. And now, with the world watching once more, he prepared to write the next chapter of his legend. When Muhammad Ali's conviction was overturned in 1971, he returned to the ring after more than 3 years away. He was no longer the young man who had danced endlessly, untouched by time. His body was heavier, his reflexes slightly dulled, yet his spirit was undiminished. The world leaned in, eager to see if the former champion still carried greatness in his gloves. His first major test came quickly. Joe Frazier, Smoking Joe, had risen to the throne while Ali was gone. Strong, relentless, champion in his own right. Frazier represented the obstacle between Ali and his crown. The meeting in Madison Square Garden that March was billed simply as the fight of the century. The build-up was electric. Ali, as always, spoke boldly. He called himself the real champion, dismissed Frazier as temporary, promised victory. Frazier, quiet but steely, refused to be cowed. When the two men stepped into the ring, the world held its breath. For 15 brutal rounds, they fought. Ali's speed and skill against Frazier's power and pressure. The fight was grueling. In the 15th round, Frazier landed his famous left hook, sending Ali sprawling to the canvas. Though Ali rose, the decision was clear. Frazier had won. Ali had lost for the first time. Defeat was bitter, but Ali did not fall silent. He trained harder, fought again, slowly rebuilding his record. In 1973, George Foreman emerged as the next unstoppable force. Younger, stronger, seemingly invincible. When Ali challenged him, most predicted disaster. Foreman had crushed opponent who had beaten Ali. To many, the fight looked hopeless, but Ali saw it differently. In 1974, under the African night sky of Kinshasa, the two men met in what became the Ramble in the Jungle. Ali entered the ring smiling, confident, his voice carrying through the crowd that chanted his name. From the first bell, he employed a strategy few understood. He leaned on the ropes, covered up, let Foreman punch and punch again. The blows rained down like hammers, but Ali absorbed them. His arms raised, his body swaying. He whispered to Foreman, taunting, mocking, daring him to punch harder. Round after round, Foreman grew tired. His power, once endless, began to fade. And then, in the 8th round, Ali struck. Combination, fast and precise, landed flush. Foreman fell. The crowd erupted. Ali stood victorious. He called it the rope a dope, and it became legend. He had outlasted the strongest man in the world, not with youth or speed, but with wit, patience, and heart. At 32, after years of exile, after defeat and doubt, Muhammad Ali was champion once more. His comeback was complete. The boy from Louisville who had once found his way into a gym after losing a bicycle now stood again at the pinnacle of the sport, his voice echoing across continent. I am still the greatest. After reclaiming his crown in Zaire, Muhammad Ali stood once more as champion of the world. Yet even as he raised his arms, time was whispering at the edges of his strength. He was no longer the untouchable youth who had danced circles around Sonny Leston. His greatness now came with weight, the scars of exile, the miles of battles, the years of punishment absorbed in the ring. Still, the legend had chapters left to write. In 1975, Ali faced Joe Frazier again for the third time. Their rivalry had become mythic. Two men bound together, each defining the other. The bout was held in Manila, in the Philippines, and was called the Thriller in Manila. The heat was merciless, the air thick. In the opening rounds, Ali danced, landing jabs, calling the fight the closest thing to dying. Frazier pressed forward with relentless hooks, each man giving not only fists but pieces of themselves. Round after round, the punishment mounted. By the 14th round, Frazier's eyes were swollen shut, his trainer refusing to let him continue. Ali, exhausted, slammed on his stool, whispering that he had never been closer to collapse. Victory was his, but it came at a terrible cost. That night became a symbol of endurance, of willpower, of two men pushing themselves beyond human limits. Ali called Frazier the greatest fighter of all time, next to me. Though the rivalry burned with bitterness, respect lingered beneath it. The years that followed brought more fight. Ali defended his title again and again, sometimes with brilliance, sometimes with struggle. In 1978, he faced Spinks, a young, untested fighter. To the shock of the world, Spinks won. Yet just months later, Ali met him again and reclaimed the crown, becoming the first man to win the heavyweight championships 3 times. But the toll was showing. His reflexes slowed. His words, once so sharp, grew heavy. Still, he pressed on. He fought Larry Holmes in 1980, a bout that left fans uneasy, as Ali took punishment without reply. 2 years later, against Trevor Berbick, he stepped into the ring for the final time. At 40 years old, he was no longer the Ali the world remembered. The decision was clear. His fighting days were over. The final rounds of his career were not only about the ring. Outside it, he was transforming from fighter into elder statesman, from brash young champion into a quiet symbol. His battles had always been larger than boxing. Battles for dignity, for faith, for conscience. Now, his very prisons carried meaning. He had stood up to America during war, had reclaimed his crown in Africa, had fought Frazier to the edge of human endurance. Win or lose, he had lived as he believed, unafraid, unbroken, unforgettable. The gloves came off. The roar of crowds faded. But Mohamed Ali's fight was never only about fist. His greatest rounds were still to come, not in the ring, but in the life that followed. When Mohamed Ali stepped away from the ring, he stepped into something larger. No longer a fighter chasing titles. He He became a figure recognized everywhere as more than an athlete. He was a symbol of conviction, of courage, of endurance. The years of boxing had taken their toll. His hands trembled. His voice slowed. Doctors diagnosed him with Parkinson's disease, a condition that would shadow him for the rest of his life. Yet, even in illness, he carried himself with dignity, where others might have hidden. Ali appeared in public, letting the world see him as he was. Slowed, yes, but never defeated. He traveled widely, speaking for peace, for compassion, for justice. He visited children's hospitals, refugee camps, nations divided by war. Wherever he went, people flocked to him, not to see a champion throw punches, but to feel the warmth of his presence, to hear him say quietly what he had once shouted boldly, that courage means standing by what you believe, even when the world stands against you. In 1996, at the Summer Olympics in Atlanta, he appeared unexpectedly. The stadium darkened, the torch was carried in, and then the crowd saw him. His body shook as he held the flame, his face sullen, but his hand lifted it high and lit the cauldron. The roar of the crowd was thunder, not for a fighter, but for a man who embodied spirit himself. For many, that moment defined him as much as any knockout had. The final years of his life were quiet. He lived with family, surrounded by love. He remained a man of faith, a man who had once risked everything for conscience and still bore that same strength. He smiled often, laughed gently, let his eyes speak when words faltered. On June the 3rd, 2016, Mohamed Ali passed away at the age of 74. The world mourned not only the greatest boxer of all time, but a man who had lived as he believed. Tribute poured in from president, kings, ordinary people who had met him once and never forgotten the encounter. His funeral in Louisville drew thousands. The boy who had once reported a stolen bicycle had left a mark on the entire world. His story is not only one of gloves and belt, it's the story of a man who stood firm in faith, who refused war, who carried himself with pride when pride was costly, who turned a sport into a stage of truth. Mohamed Ali, born Cassius Clay, crowned champion, stripped of titles, exiled, returned, triumphant, humbled, slowed by illness, honored in death. His life was a fight, but also a poem. His words linger still. I am the greatest. I said that even before I knew I was. And in the end, he was. This was Hypnos. Another story has been told, and now it's time to rest. Good night.